I'm sure you've probably come across communications from nonprofits that just seem to perfectly capture who they are, what they stand for, and why their work matters. This essential narrative about the organization, in my opinion, is often what separates nonprofits that have truly phenomenal communications from the rest. And that filters into so many other aspects of their work, like cultivating a loyal community, building a donor base, increasing brand awareness. There's so many ways that can really support these other aspects of their work. Well, in today's video, I want to break down 4 steps your nonprofit can take to actually develop its own narrative and ensure that you have this down. My name is Vanessa Lockshin, and I'm the president of the Storytelling Nonprofit, a consulting and training company that works with nonprofit organizations to help them tell stories that raise money and awareness. Let's get right into today's topic. So first of all, let's talk about the difference between storytelling and narrative. One of the things that I often observe in our sector among nonprofits and among communicators is that there's often this conflation between what story is and what narrative is. And so I want to talk about those two things because I think understanding them as the same thing actually does a disservice to all of us. So I always think about a story as a contained instance. So this is when something happens to someone or something. It's told with emotions and details. There's some conflict. There's a resolution. We may use an archetype to tell this story. If some of you have been through my classes, you know that I teach a story structure. You may use something like a hero's journey, that sort of thing. A narrative, on the other hand, is a collection or constellation of related stories that represent a sort of central idea or belief that the organization is trying to communicate. This is really a backbone of all of these stories and all the communications. And I think over time, this leads to better consistency among all the stories that the organization tells. So you can see those are two definitely distinct things. And I think it's important to know that narrative is what happens over time, whereas stories can just be that one-time instance that happens, on any old Tuesday that you might be sharing this story. So step number 1 is to research and assess. I talk all the time about the most important part of storytelling being knowing your audience, doing your research, and figuring out how to tell the best story at the right time to the right people. This is really a critical part, even in developing narrative as well. I like to encourage organizations to take stock of what they've done, think about what they want to go, where they want to go, and consider what is it that they're actually communicating to their audiences now. So look at all the stories you've told or all the communications you're putting out there. What are some central ideas that are coming through in there? Is there consistency? Are you maybe all over the map at how you talk about the cause or sort of the positioning you have of your organization? Who is the audience for these? What are the issues or causes you're talking about? What is the organization's analysis or perspective on the issue or cause? That's really important in narrative, because if your organization does not have a unique position, a unique voice on the issue, chances are it's probably not going to stand out and be able to create that strong, compelling narrative. So that's a really essential thing. And if your organization is feeling afraid to take a stand on something, I want to encourage you and give you some advice on this. Having a watered down view on what it is you do is going to make you the most unmemorable organization ever. I really encourage organizations to take a strong stand, communicate that, and, be okay if there's some people who disagree with that. Step number 2 is to identify what you want people to know about your issue or cause. So this is a little bit like kind of a second phase of research. So once you've started to think about what is it we've told people, what do people, who's the audience for this, what perspective do we have on it, I want you to think about what is it that your audience actually knows now, and what is it that you want them to know? So how are you taking them from point A to point B? I talk about this a lot in storytelling, which is that stories are a way for us to take our audience on a journey from thinking to feeling, from point A to point B. It helps them understand information more easily. And the same is true for narrative. This is where we need to understand what our audience knows so we can figure out how we maybe need to educate them or bring them along on this journey over time. One of the benefits of a really strong narrative is that your organization can really take a proactive role in it, right? So after you've done your research, you need to make a decision about what you want people to know and why. This really forms the basis of that narrative, and it's so, so important for your organization to do this. Step number 3 is to develop a statement. This is your narrative statement that weaves together the issues at stake or the cause that you're working on and your theory of change to convey what you identified in step 2. Now that was a lot, so I'm going to explain it. So first, you're going to take the issue or cause you're working on. That's number 1. Next, you're going to take your theory of change, which if you haven't heard of theory of change before, I'll leave some links below this video to what that is. But theory of change is essentially how you're going to do your work or how change is going to come about. So that's number 2. And number 3 is to convey what you identified in step 2, which is what do you want people to know about your cause or the work that you're doing. So that's kind of your unique perspective. So the idea is that in order to create this narrative, we're blending those 3 things together. We're bringing them together to create this trifecta, this really effective statement of who we are, what work we do, why we're doing it, and how we're doing it. Those things are really important. And having this statement together is definitely different than your mission statement. I think this is really a more elaborate statement about how that mission happens and why your organization takes the stands that it does. So that's about bringing those things together. I always think that your task in developing this statement is to really bring together the basic information people need to know. So bottom lining it, what's happening, who's in this story, or who's in the narrative, I should say. What's going on, what's at stake, what are we doing about it? These are also questions you can think about if you're struggling to figure out, well, how do I figure this out for our organization? And I'll say, even as a professional writer and a consultant, I rarely get these things right on the first draft. And this is often my advice to people who are also writers within their organizations, is to give yourself some slack in this process. Know that it may take you several weeks to get exactly the right statement. It may even take you several months to refine it, to get feedback, and that's okay. Don't aim for hitting a home run on the first try, not with writing. This is something that you can improve at over time. And sometimes that's better because you'll get feedback and data that you can then use to figure out what changes to make. The last thing I want to say about this too is that this statement does not have to be perfect for public consumption. And by that, I mean, it's not really a statement that you're going to be putting out there, on your website. It's really more of an internal statement that you're going to use as like a litmus test to make sure that your stories make sense with this narrative you're trying to communicate. All right, and step 4, the final step in all of this, is to identify stories and messages that you can roll out over time that will reinforce this narrative. And this is where I really think rubber meets the road around strategy, where organizations can get it together to help them tell a consistent story over time about a really powerful and I think effective narrative statement. So this is where your creative juices can get flowing. You can brainstorm, like, what kind of stories do we want to tell? Who are the characters in them? What will make sense based on this narrative that we want to share with people? Spend some time mapping those things out. And this is where you get to create that beautiful collection or constellation of stories that reinforce that narrative for your organization. All right, so those are the 4 steps to creating a narrative, and I hope they're helpful for you. If you've never thought about creating a narrative before for your organization, I think this is a great activity to do. It's something that can be really valuable, and I think can also in the process bring team members together and rally everyone again around the important mission and the awesome work your organization does. I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Have you worked on something like this before? Is it something you're thinking about doing? Let me know. I'd love to hear about your progress and what steps you're going to take to either start your narrative or maybe refine it a little bit more. As always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this video useful. Every week we release new tutorials and video content on our YouTube channel to help you with your fundraising and communications. Be sure to subscribe using the button in the lower right-hand corner of your screen.